let's talk about some wedding preliminaries. And so, when we do the funeral preparation seminar, I try to kind of walk, people through just a practical walkthrough from the time that you first find out about a death until you've had the dinner at the church after the funeral's over. Just walk people through that process. And so I thought it would be helpful to at least kind of think about the marriage in that same way. So from the first time that somebody approaches you and says, "Hey, we're talking about getting married. We would like for you to officiate our wedding," you can first of all run that through, your policy, whether or not you will even consider marrying them. And there may be some occasions too where you don't rule them out because of your policy, but you still would like to sit down and talk to them about it, especially if it's somebody that maybe you don't know as well, somebody outside the church or whatever. Yeah, I'll talk to you about it. So we'll sit down and we'll talk. And so I want to talk about premarital counseling and some of the things that we might discuss as we meet together. Now, every minister should have some at least general idea of what kind of conference is going to be required before we do a wedding. I've had people call me kind of on the spur of the moment. "Hey, we're getting married, Friday afternoon. Do you care to, do?" And depending on my relationship with them and what have you, I've done some weddings where we just showed up at the church and they got married and we went home and they didn't want a big wedding or whatever the case was. They talked about getting married. It wasn't a surprise or anything like that. And so the idea of needing any kind of formal sit down may not always be necessary, but you ought to at least have some idea what I'm going to do on those occasions when it is. And some ministers want to sit down with a couple 4 times. Some ministers, if they had to sit down 4 times with a couple, they would never marry anybody, because our schedules are such that sometimes that's more challenging than doing the wedding itself. And so one of the things that we should try to accomplish, whether we do this all in one setting or whether we do this over the course of several meetings with them, we should discuss matters of formality. And by that I'm talking about the wedding itself, the ceremony itself. And so, when you're talking to, and sometimes you'll accomplish this immediately when they say, "Hey, we're getting married and we'd like you to do the ceremony." One of the first things you may say right then, "Okay, when is this wedding and where is it?" And so some of this you can take care of right away. And so when and where certainly are the most important things, the primary things that you're going to have to consider and check your own schedule. And then you may also, and you sit down and you may get to talking about, okay, talk to me about the wedding party. I always like to know before we get, I want to know, number one, is this wedding going to be sufficient enough that we're going to have a rehearsal? And most of the time, the wedding is going to require some kind of a rehearsal. And so if we're going to have to, you want to tell me when we're going to get married. If we're going to do it on a Saturday evening in the fall, I need to just plan on the Friday night. We're going to get together, on Friday night, and we'll do a rehearsal. And so I want to know right up front what I'm looking at. Tell me about the wedding party. How big a party is this? And how many bridesmaids have we got? How many groomsmen do we have? Do we have ushers? Do we have ring bearers and flower girls? Do we have miniature brides and miniature grooms? I'll ask things about the wedding party. I'll ask questions about about the family dynamic, because family dynamics make a big difference. Now, you may not exclude somebody and say, "No, I'm just not going to fool with somebody. I'm not going to marry you if your mom and dad are divorced and can't talk to each other." But I'm not going to rule you out. But if your mom and dad are divorced and they can't even talk to each other, I want to know that before I show up at this wedding, right? I want to know what the family dynamic is like on both sides of the family. I want to know what we're going to be looking at before we ever gather for a rehearsal, so that I can be up on that. Who the family, who's going to give the bride away is another important part of that. These are simple questions that you may not think about until they're not in the rehearsal, but I kind of like to know them going into the rehearsal so that I got a game plan before then. You might ask about musicians and songs. What kind of music are you going to play? Music? Is somebody going to sing music? Have you got live musicians? I need to know about that. One of those reasons is that if you're going to have music, I'm going to have to make arrangements with somebody to run the sound, and so again, that's another issue. If you got somebody if you're going to play some music, have you got somebody that can at least, hit the pause button on the CD player or whatever that can get us through this wedding, or is this something where I'm going to have some help and ask some folks in the church to come and help me out? Is there, a wedding photographer, a wedding videographer? How big? You're going to just rely on family pictures to get you through this, or are you going to hire a professional? These are things I want to know the answer to, so that I can, get an idea of what I'm going to have, what I'm going to have to contend with the day of the wedding. Is there a wedding consultant? Sometimes people will hire a wedding consultant, and as the officiant, I want to know, who I'm going to have to work with, especially when it comes time for that rehearsal, and then the day of the wedding, getting that thing rolling, and so tell me, about your staff, or about the staffing needs that may be required, and tell me about what you got going on for the service. And then I also will ask, and a lot of times I'll have this meeting, if it's a couple especially that maybe I'm not as close to or familiar with. For years I subbed in the Middlesboro school system. I've done a lot of weddings for kids that either my kids went to school with, or I'm maybe the only preacher that they're not really church folks. And so sometimes I'll say, listen, just meet me at the Mexican restaurant. We'll meet 2 or 3 weeks before the wedding or whatever, and I'll go over all of this. We're sitting down at having a meal together. I choose to do it that way because people who are not churched can be really intimidated, coming into the church and sitting down at the office across from the preacher and this, and I do not want anybody to feel intimidated or uncomfortable. I want to be able to talk to them about some other stuff, without and really get to the heart of the matter without appearing combative in any way. And so just setting the tone for that meeting makes a big difference. But we'll sit down. I always ask, what type of service do you want to have? A lot of people, if they've not been to a lot of weddings, and the only weddings that they know about are the weddings that they've seen in TVs and TV shows and in the movies or whatever, and so some people just don't know. And so I typically will ask, do you prefer a traditional wedding liturgy, or do you prefer something more modern, more contemporary? Now, what I have discovered is that's about half and half. It's about people's preference. They hear, weddings in the movies or whatever. They hear people say, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered together here in the sight of God and in the face of this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." And to them, that's what a wedding is. That's what they want. They want to say, "I do." They want to repeat their vows. To each other. They want a traditional wedding service. And other people come and say, no, we'd rather have something more modern, something more contemporary, a service that more opens with friends. We've gathered together today at the invitation of John and Mary to celebrate their union together. And so, again, getting a feel for what kind of service that they're looking for. I typically will ask, about scriptural readings. Is there a particular passage of scripture that you would like to have read? Now, people who have been in church, people who have, have done this, have been to weddings before, whatever, and have a Christian background, they may have particular passages of Scripture that are meaningful to them, that they would like to, I would like for you to read, such and such. And so if they, but a lot of people, no, just whatever, whatever you feel like. And so that's okay too. I want to know, but again, we're talking about matters of formality. I want to know, are we going to have, are there going to be candles at this wedding? I'm talking about candles that need to be lit. We're going to have candelabras. Give me an idea before we ever get to this wedding, what's going to be, because before we get to the rehearsal and start doing a walkthrough, I want to get an idea of what we're looking at. Is there a kneeling bench? Some couples want to kneel and do their vows or this and that and the other. Are we going to serve communion? Some couples prefer, communion. Is there an aisle runner? We're getting to the place where it is becoming less and less popular to have an aisle runner. There's a reason for that. Most of the aisle runners that are made today are either terribly expensive or they're junk. It's one or the other. And so if you're not going to go spend a couple $100 on an expensive aisle runner, you're just better off not to even have one. They're a mess to fool with, and so people just aren't fooling with them. But I want to know things about, are rings going to be exchanged? What about flowers? Sometimes couples will, give flowers to each other's mothers or what have you. And I always will ask the question too about dismissal. When it comes time for dismissal, how do you want the congregation to be dismissed after the wedding? Again, we'll ask questions about communion. Sometimes people want communion. Sometimes I've seen foot washing at weddings also. I'm not generally a fan of that for a couple of reasons. One of those has to do with the time that is involved with that. And if you don't have a really long song being played, it can get really awkward. It's already going to be awkward because you got 200 people sitting and staring at you while you're taking each other's shoes off and what have you. I went to a wedding one time where the groom was wearing cowboy boots and like they never got them off, and it's just and you're thinking you guys could have done this at the house tonight. I mean, you could have saved the foot washing for your honeymoon or something. But at any rate, people want to include it, and so I want to know that. I want to know these things. I want to know about the token of unity. For years, traditionally, it was the lighting of a unity candle. Now people, a lot of times will do the sand ceremony, or sometimes I've seen, the tying of a knot, or, the building of a cross. I mean, we've seen several different, they all have the same purpose, to demonstrate the two becoming one. And so, again, I'll ask the question, how is that going to be demonstrated, if it's going to be demonstrated? And then, about any special, requests, what kind of requests that, what else might be, I want to know about this stuff as far in advance as possible. I counseled with a couple one time that asked me about the ring bearer. They wanted their dog to be the ring bearer. And my first reaction was, I'm not sure that I was, but they assured me that their dog, this was a very small dog, and that it would not cause problems in the church. It wasn't going to shed. It wasn't going to mess the carpet up. It wasn't going to do anything like that. It wasn't going to slobber all over anything. And so they did. They had I can't remember what kind it was, but their small dog carried the ring in. And if that means something to folks, then that's fine. Now, if those had been, if they said we got two Great Danes that I probably would have balked on that a little bit. But again, deal with special requests. I typically will ask a question also about a reception. You're going to have some sort of reception, and ask about it, and get more information. About what they want. It might be appropriate at this place also to talk about the church use policy. Again, if it's a couple that's coming to you and they're wanting to get married and they're wanting to use your church, then that's an issue that you may have to say, well, wait a minute, our church has an official policy, let's refer to it. And so if you're not in a position to just, number one, to book an event at the church, then you got to get back with them. But then also, every church has their own policy about who can use the church and for what, and if necessary, is there a fee that's involved? Sometimes this, because of the extra traffic or what have you, that we've got to count on the janitor to come back on a Saturday night or whatever, or you're going to make sure it gets cleaned. Sometimes a church will require a deposit just in case you leave it a mess or whatever, you won't get that back or whatever the case is. But you may discuss the church use policy, the church and the fellowship hall if necessary. Some people have asked sometimes about the fellowship hall and about using it for a reception. And of course, one of the questions you have to consider, again, your own church policy may vary, from congregation to congregation, but there's some churches that would say, well, yeah, you can use the fellowship hall to have a reception, have dinner, you guys can have food, but some churches are not going to allow dancing in the fellowship hall, and if you just feel like you just got to have a first dance or father and dad dance or whatever, you probably ought to consider looking at somewhere else. And certainly most churches are not going to allow people to use tobacco in their fellowship hall, and they're not going to allow alcohol to be served in their fellowship hall either. And so again, you need to be clear, especially if they're folks that are not church folks. And I hate to say it, but even church folks, you better be clear of anymore. But just be sure before you start, make sure that they know these are the guys. And I think it's a good idea for churches to have in print, this is our policy for guidelines for use of our facilities. And then you may discuss an honorarium or a fee. If it's somebody you don't know or whatever, then you may discuss that at that time. Well, listen, I'm glad to do it or whatever, but but my time is valuable, and so if you feel like that is necessary to discuss a fee or again an honorarium. We talked about legal issues earlier. I am not in the marriage business. That is not at all that is not at all my job, and so I'm not worried about getting sued for turning anybody down. Somebody probably could argue, well, you do get paid to do weddings sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. And then sometimes I've had people offer to pay me, and I've said, no, you know what? My attitude has always been, I tell folks this all the time, I am when you are at the happiest moment of your life, I am front and center in all the pictures. You know what I mean? That is an honor for me to be able to participate. And so I have, I've had people ask, how much do we owe you? That's a scary, question also. Somebody said one time that a couple got married and the groom was so nervous that he kissed the minister and gave his wife $20. And so I don't want to do that either. One guy said, how much is she worth to you? And then when the groom handed him $5 for officiating the wedding, he kind of felt like, well, this marriage ain't gonna last long. What's she worth? But again, if that's something that is going to, again, you're talking about the time that it takes to do the wedding, the time that it takes to do a rehearsal. You're talking about a couple of hours at least out of your weekend, and so don't be afraid to discuss that also if it's relevant. And then also this matter of formality, you should also talk about the time of the rehearsal. We're going to meet, if a rehearsal is necessary, and most of the time it will be, we're going to set a time for the rehearsal. And I can't say this enough about the importance of stressing the importance of attendance by all participants. Everybody that's in this wedding needs to be at that rehearsal. I mean, to the point where if you just have to say, listen, I'm not even going to show up the day of the wedding if anybody in your wedding party don't show up at it stress the importance of being there. So even people that say, oh yeah, I know what and you'll always have somebody that say, yeah, but so-and-so will stand in for them and they'll tell them where to stand and this and that and the other. I hate that. It's a pet peeve of mine. Part of it is, if you care so much about these people, if they mean that much to you that you're going to ask them to be in your wedding and they don't have the time to show up at your rehearsal the night before, you probably should have found somebody else to be in your wedding. I mean, they're not that close a friend to you if they can't give you a Friday night in addition to a Saturday afternoon. And so whether they think it's necessary or not, do whatever you can to get everybody that's going to participate at that wedding. Singers, musicians, whatever, if they want to practice, in the sanctuary, maybe it's the church that they don't typically sing in or something, by all means, come the night before. We're not going to run through all the music during the rehearsal, but they can come earlier, they can stay later, and that way they can get a feel for the place too. So again, one of the things that you'll deal with are these matters of formality, and then want to talk about matters of faith. I like to sit down and talk to folks too about the theological underpinnings of marriage. I like to talk to them about the importance of their commitment to Christ, and I like to talk to them about the importance of a church family. I told you I get people all the time that come and ask me to do weddings for them that they knew my kids or they met me at when I was subbing at Middlesboro High School, or sometimes people will say, well, you married so and so, we were at that wedding, or whatever, we just really would like for you to do our wedding. And I have sat down with couples on numerous occasions. Again, I like to do this, having dinner, we go to the Mexican place, sit down and talk, and we'll talk about all these matters of formality, and then I'll say to them, listen, you guys have asked a relative stranger to officiate this wedding for you, and I am honored. I tell couples all the time, I am delighted that you would choose to have me in the pictures that you're going to hold on to for years, and you paid all this money to get a photographer to come and take professional photographs of the three of us. What a beautiful what a high honor that is. But I tell them all the time, you've asked a relative stranger, and I'm delighted to do it. I'm happy to do it. I'm honored that you'd ask me. But there are going to be times in your life going forward where you're going to need a minister in crisis and difficult times and what have you. And when you call on a minister for a crisis down the road, you're going to want a preacher that you know better than you know me. Right? And I tell them all the time, I do funerals all the time for people that I've never met. And I'm glad to do it. I'm honored that I'd be asked, to do whatever I can to help a family. But I tell these couples when I'm married, I say, I always do better funerals for people that I know, that I have a relationship with. And I know you're not thinking about, crises, when you're preparing for happy moments, but life is filled with happy moments and sad moments. And so I stress them the importance. There are going to be times where you're going to need a church family to call on. There are going to be happy moments that you're going to want to be celebrated. I said, we're glad to open the church up, let you have your wedding here. We want you to come back and have your baby showers here, right? I mean, we want this church to be a part of you're going to need a church family. And so I talk to, I talk pretty straight to them about this need for a church family. Talk about, again, what marriage is, and talk about their relationship with the Lord. And then also you talk about matters of family. A lot of ministers, again, they separate these over different sessions. They'll meet with a couple maybe several different times and talk about different things. Matters of family. Talk about things like where you're going to live. You're coming from two different houses, and where are you going to live. Talk about things like your finances. Finances are going to be a potential for challenges in your marriage, in your home, and so you need to be sure. You need to be you need to be prepared, for finances. Who's going to take care of the checkbook? Who's going to make sure that the bills are paid, and this and that and the other? So talk about finances. Talk about things like in-laws. You're marrying into a family. You're not just marrying a person. You're marrying the whole family, whether you like it or not. You're taking them all in. And so, talk about in-laws. Talk about things like holidays. Have you discussed it yet? If both of you have been used to being with mom and dad every Christmas morning, you're going to have some new Christmas mornings that you can't be in two places at the same time. And so how are you going to navigate that, work that out? One day you're going to have children. You need to talk about children. Talk about, have you given thought to parenting? And talk about the importance of establishing your own traditions. You're bringing family traditions into this new family. You're creating a new family, and talk about the need to create new traditions within your own family. So talk about matters of family as well. And then let's talk about rehearsal conducting. I talk about the preliminaries, things that build up to it. Let's get to the night then of the rehearsal. And I want to say a few things about the rehearsal itself, conducting the rehearsal. And the most important thing, this could even be the most important thing I'm going to say this morning at all. Take charge of the rehearsal. You are the officiant of this wedding, and I promise, if you don't take charge of the rehearsal, you're going to be there all night long. If you're waiting on somebody else to take charge or whatever, you've got to be in control at that rehearsal. You need to be in charge, and you need to make sure that the couple knows ahead of time that you will take charge. Even if they have hired a wedding planner, they've got a consultant or whatever, you need to be sure that I'm the officiant, I'm in control here, I'm taking charge. Now, there's some pros to this that they also need to be aware of as well. Because I'm in charge, I don't care to be the one that everybody hates on after this wedding is over. I'll take that. I gladly will take that heat as well. And so take control, take charge of the wedding, and value your own time. If you don't come in there and take control of that rehearsal, you're going to be there for hours. You're going to be there a lot longer than is necessary. And if you don't value your own time any more than that, then then you probably ought to stop back and take really begin to evaluate what time really means, because time does matter. You're taking time away from your family, for this event, and really no more than an hour should be necessary for a wedding rehearsal. No more than an hour. And if it's done correctly, if you go in there with a game plan, you know what you're going to do, then go in there valuing your time and everybody else's. Make very few changes in the rehearsal. So that, and that's what I say, the importance of sitting down during that counseling session ahead of time, getting an idea, this is what we're going to do. I know that sometimes there's always something that you didn't think about. There's always, something, we forgot about grandma. We got to bring grandma in too. There's always going to be something that comes up. You may decide that, this song doesn't work. This song's not long enough. For the sand ceremony or for the foot washing or whatever. And so we need to maybe swap or whatever. But I'm just saying, you make as few changes as possible at the rehearsal, and run every decision through the bride. I need to put this up there too. I think this is another important point. Defer to the bride on every decision. It is her wedding. It is her wedding. Now, I know there may be somebody that's thinking, well, isn't it both of them's wedding? Well, no. Most of us guys are at the point where, hey, whatever you want. At that point in time, you know what? Especially by the time the rehearsal rolls around, he's just wanting to get to the honeymoon. And you know what? Let's just, whatever works. Always defer to the bride. If there is a wedding, what I have discovered is this. At any typical wedding rehearsal, the officiant is the most experienced person in the room when it comes to weddings. There's always somebody that says, well, I was at so-and-so's wedding my cousin got married last week, and it's like, so what? I did 12 weddings last year. You've been to one in the last 5 years. The officiant is always the most knowledgeable, the most qualified to speak on issues so don't let anybody hijack somebody else's wedding. Don't let a mother-in-law or a future mother-in-law, don't let somebody's mama get involved in the wedding. Because there's always going to be a decision that has to be made and whatever. You're always got 4 or 5 people throwing out their opinions, and I always look directly at the bride and say, "Now, what do you think?" May throw out a few options. This is what some people do. This is what other people do. But this is your wedding. What would you like to do? And so again, it is her wedding. So filter every decision through her. When you start the rehearsal, the best place to start is with everybody in place where they're going to be during the wedding ceremony. I know some people try to start in the back and then walk through and this and that. No, start up there in the front. Let's go up to the front. Let's get everybody situated so that they know where they're going when they start, when you start actually doing the walkthrough. So begin with everyone in place. And order and placement matters. Right? Placement matters. And so be sure that you get, the bride has probably chosen a maid of honor. The groom has chosen a best man. Get them in position where they should be. If you've got ring bearers and what have you, make sure that they know where they're supposed to be. A lot of times, the ring bearer, you've got small children, they may be in a position where they need to be near somebody in the wedding party that can kind of corral them or whatever. So make sure, get everybody in place where they belong. Make sure it looks good for pictures. Get everybody in place so that they know where they need to be when they come in. And I know sometimes people like to put a little a sticker or something on the on the floor, whatever, to where they're going to stand, where they know where to go to when they get in there. We did a wedding outside one time at the park, at the state park, and beautiful place to get married. And so the couple, we get everybody lined up, and everybody's like, well, how are we going to know which blade of the grass is which? And one of the groomsmen just happened to be a golfer, and wait a minute, and so he come back with golf tees, and he had enough tees to put everybody right where they needed to go, and that worked out well. But knowing where to go, of course, if it's a large party, that's even more important than if it's just a couple on each side or what have you. But get everybody in place. Placement matters, and then go back to the back of the building and do the walkthrough. And I want to say also, always, anytime we're doing the walkthrough, you cannot stress enough that pace matters. And I always tell couples when we're doing the walkthrough, I always tell people it is impossible to walk too slow. You can only walk too fast. And so I find myself during the rehearsal constantly saying, slow down. You are walking way too fast. Number one, if there's a photographer that's trying to get pictures, and they're going to get pictures of each person that's coming in and what have you, you can't be marching, to the same beat that the football team's, running out on the field to. And the other thing about the rehearsal, again, impressing on them how important it is to be slow. I mean, to the point where you feel like you're beating a dead horse, is because it doesn't matter how slow they are at the rehearsal, they're going to be twice as fast during the wedding. And so the next day, when everybody's nervous and they're all dressed up and whatever, they're going to come through fast. So I always tell folks that there's no such thing as too slow. Just take your time. This is your mother. People, everybody's watching you. The people are taking pictures of you. Make sure they get good pictures. Walk slowly, and we'll be fine. Usually there's music that's playing, and I always tell people it is always better. It is always better to have the music run out and have the last person in the wedding party walking down in silence. That's always better than having everybody in there halfway through the song. And you're either standing up there playing the rest of it while you're sitting around waiting on the bride to come in, or worse than that, you just cut it off and stop the music. And I tell people all the time, if you're going to go to all the trouble of picking out a song that means something to you, we're going to play it all the way through. We're going to play both verses. We're going to play both choruses. We're going to listen to the bridge. We're going to do the whole. So slow down as you're coming in. Another thing, you walk through the ceremony, get everybody up there in place, and do a walk through the ceremony so that you can explain the various parts of the service. And you don't have to say every word that you're going to say at the wedding. I typically prefer not to do that, but you'll do a walkthrough, say this is where I'm going to welcome. I will do the welcome to everybody. Then I'm going to get a declaration of consent. I'm going to get you to say I do. You say I do. I'm going to say who gives this woman to be married to this man. And at this point, and you're walking people through that process. At this point, you're going to pass your bouquet off to your maid of honor. You guys are going to join hands, and I'm going to read a few scriptures. I'm going to ask you to repeat your vows after me. I will give you short, simple phrases to repeat after me, and then you'll say them. Always tell couples, listen, tomorrow when everybody's eyes are on you and everybody's ears are listening, it is possible, it's likely that as I'm reading even 3 and 4 words, that you'll get nervous and you'll forget what I just said. That's okay. If you do, I'll repeat it. We got no problem with that. Don't panic. It'll be fine. We'll get through this thing. And so again, I give short, usually it's 3-4 words at a time to get us through the vows. Ask them to repeat after me. We're going to come back, do that demonstration of unity. We'll talk about, then we're going to have this song, or I'll tell whoever's, taking care of music, okay, when I do this, when I say this, that's when you're going to hit the music. We're going to play that song, play it all the way through. Then we'll come back, we'll do this. I'll pray a prayer. I'm going to lay my hands on your hands, and I'm going to pray a prayer and ask God to bless your union together. And then I'll go back and we'll kind of rehash everything we just did, and I'll ask you to kiss the bride, and then I'll introduce you as Mr. and Mrs. and then we'll walk out. And so we always do a walk through, walk in, get everybody in place. After they already know where their place is, we do the walkthrough, bring them in, kind of walk through the quick, this is what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, we're going to exchange the rings, this is how we're going to exchange rings, whatever, and then we'll practice walking out. Now make sure musicians are prepared. They should already be rehearsed. By the time you get to the rehearsal, there's almost never a reason for them to be practicing during the, for one, especially if you've got kids that are involved in the ceremony and whatever, you don't want somebody singing a 5-minute song 3 times or whatever where you're trying to keep everybody's attention. Whatever. They can practice on their own, and really, the music will be better anyway the day of the wedding if we're not already sick of it by the time we get to that point. And so, again, practice those things. Communicate timing with the sound technician, whoever's taking care of it. Practice walking in and out until everybody is sure of what they're doing. Make sure everybody knows where they're going and when to go and this and that and the other. Usually, a couple of times of coming in and going out are usually sufficient for bringing the wedding party in and sending them out. Every once in a while, especially if you did one out of order at some point in time, or you're doing a walkthrough, you might need to do it a third time. But for the most part, by that, and I always will ask, is everybody comfortable? And again, defer to the bride. Are you satisfied with where we're at? Are you good to go? And then dismiss the rehearsal with clear expectations. Communicate clear expectations for the wedding day. All right. So in other words, what time? I want to know what time are people going to get here. When are people going to get here? I need to have the church open or whatever. What time do we need to be here? Communicate to the wedding party. Most of the time, we're taking at least some of the pictures before the wedding. And so, they need to know what time they need to be here. They need to be dressed and ready to go and all of that. I always tell the couple to bring the marriage license to the rehearsal. if they've not brought it to me before then. But always tell a couple to bring the license to me to the rehearsal. That's for a couple of reasons. Number one, I like to go ahead and start getting it filled out before the day of the wedding. And number two, if you've got 25,000 other things to try to think of the day of your wedding, the last thing you want to think about is, where's the license? Who's got the license? And so make sure you just bring it to me. That way I know I've got it, and that's one less thing that you've got to have to worry about, that you've got to fool with. I did a wedding one time in Tennessee, and at somebody's home, and after the service was over, so okay, let's get the license filled out, and they spent an hour tearing the house down trying to find that license. It was somewhere in the house, and the only thing I was thinking is, I'm glad it's a judge's daughter that I'm doing this wedding for, that at least somebody's here to help me out, if we have issues with that. But again, be sure. And again, I guess I had a couple other things here on the slides. Just emphasize again the proper placement and pace. Walk through the ceremony till everyone is comfortable, and then clearly communicate expectations. Let's talk about the wedding performance itself. This is our last slide. Just talk about the performance, the ceremony itself. And just I want to walk down through an order of ceremony. And of course, the wedding ceremony typically begins with a processional. This is typically, will start, and again, it depends on the nature of the wedding. Some weddings are bigger than others, have more people that are involved. But typically there are ushers that are seating guests upon arrival. Typically the bride, the family of the bride will sit on the left. Family and friends of the bride will sit on the left. The family and friends of the groom will sit on the right. This is not always necessary. In some cases, you may have where one family is much larger than the other family, or you may, if somebody is getting married in a place where where one of the parties is not from, there's a more likelihood that there will be, and so, you usually tell ushers when you're seating guests, and you may ask, if they have a preference, friend of the bride or friend of the groom or whatever, that also be conscious that if one side starts filling up too fast, it's okay to sit people on the other. Now, there's a lot of people that have actually got signs up their wedding that basically says something like pick a side or whatever. We're all one, and so that's okay too. And so again, in a traditional wedding, formal wedding, the bride's family and friends would be on the left side facing the congregation, or facing the front of the church, and on the right side would be the grooms. And so and then right before the ceremony is to begin, the ushers would probably seat any grandparents that are living. They would bring them in. Usually there's music playing at that point. They'll come in, and sometimes they'll come in and light candles. Sometimes the candles are already lit, part of the ceremony. But you need to work that out with the couple, what they want, what's going to happen. They would typically bring in the grandparents and seat them, and then they would and let me say this too about wedding time, when the time of the wedding is supposed to start. Again, I value people's times, and if you said in your invitation the wedding's going to start at 2 o'clock, we're going to do everything we can to start at 2 o'clock. It may not always work out that way. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't. People are notoriously late for everything. But I usually will defer again to the bride and the groom. I'll usually go to both of them personally before we ever, are we ready to start or whatever. Usually the bride is hidden somewhere, but I'll usually go to wherever the bride is at, just say, hey, is everybody here? Now, she's not seen, but she would have heard, right? Somebody would have texted. If somebody's on their way, they got stuck in traffic or whatever, they're running 5 minutes late or something. If we need to wait 5 minutes, we'll wait 5 minutes. If not, if we're ready to go, we're ready to go. Same thing with the groom. Is you look around, is there anybody that should be here that's not, that you need to call? Because weddings are typically short. And so if you show up 20 minutes late, you might have got there in time to have rice, to throw the rice. And so we usually will try to to make sure everybody's there. But the seating begins with the grandparents, and then the parents are brought in, and typically the mothers are brought in. The mother of the groom is brought in, and then the mother of the bride is brought in right before the wedding party itself would come out. And so candles sometimes are lit prior to this, to bringing anybody in. Sometimes the mothers are lighting the unity, the candles that are going to light the unity candle. They're lighting their own candles, and then being seated. If there's an aisle runner, then it would, sometimes it is pulled out at that point. Sometimes the aisle runner, the ushers will come back right before the flower girl comes down the aisle, or right before the bride, or what have you. So work that out so that they know when the aisle run, if there is an aisle. Some couples anymore, some marriages, if they have an aisle runner at all, they roll it out before the wedding ever starts, and then direct all their guests to use the side aisles to sit down, and so that works out. That works out all right too. But it's when the wedding party is ready to come in, typically the minister would come out at that point with the groom. Sometimes the groom and the best man. Generally, the groom and the best man will come out together. Sometimes it's all the groomsmen. This is another thing that you need to work out too well before the rehearsal. Find out if the groomsmen are going to walk the bridesmaids down the aisle, whether they're escorting them in or whether they're just going to escort them out. Sometimes and people will have preferences based on just what they want or what they've seen in the past. But work that out, so that you'll know where you're going to be hiding with the groom or whatever, and then come out at the beginning of the service to watch the wedding party come down the aisle. And then, of course, the wedding party is coming in. You'll work through this during the rehearsal. They're coming in from the outside in. And so the groomsmen and the bridesmaids that are furthest from the bride, they would come in first. And then so on, until finally the maid of honor comes in, and she'll be right by the bride, the closest to. So again, you're starting from. And again, it's another pet peeve of mine. You go to some weddings where people get this backwards, and they start from the maid of honor comes in first, and you're scratching what, and so. But anyway, so you're building this kind of pyramid, if you will, from the outside in, and then a ring bearer would come in, flower girl. Now, there's nothing cuter than a ring bearer that's dressed to the hilt, handsome little dude coming down the aisle with a ring. Nothing cuter than a flower girl coming down the aisle, dropping petals and what have you. But let me say this again. I got so many. Grumpy old man comes out to me sometimes, especially when it comes to weddings. They're not the center stage, and I can't stand when a ring bearer or a flower girl upstages the wedding. And so I to the point where sometimes, and I know ages can matter, and this and that and the other, and what have you, and people have strong feelings. I just got to have my niece. She's not really old enough to do this. I always kind of say, well, maybe you ought to find somebody else or whatever. I just kind of because again, all of the attention should be on the bride. There's a wedding that's coming one of these days, and all of the attention is going to be on the bride. Jesus is coming back after his bride. And so, we are painting a picture of a wedding that's to come. And so, again, it's important to me to focus that attention. I don't want anybody to get in the way of that. And so, you'll find out in rehearsal whether ring bearers and whether flower girls, whether they are able to stand up there with the wedding party. A lot of times, especially if they're really young, family members will come, get them, sit down with them. That's always my preference. If somebody can't stand for the 50, if it's a small child or whatever, yes, and by all means, somebody's grandparents, somebody come get the child, and that way they're not up there distracting from the ceremony itself. But the ring bearer and the flower girl will come in, and then at that point, everybody's up in place. There's generally a change in the music. And whether it's the traditional wedding march or some brides choose to come into something else, the mother of the bride would stand and signal to the congregation that everybody else should stand. Now, if for whatever reason the bride starts coming down the aisle and mama has forgot, that she was supposed to stand up and this, that, and the others, then it's appropriate, and you should at that point ask for the congregation, motion to them, or say, "Will you all please stand?" And so they'll stand. And while the bride comes down the aisle. Now, some people at that point, after the processional, everybody gets up there in place. Some people will include a prayer at that point. And there's different points in the course of the service, but it's a matter of preference. Where some would pray at the very beginning, or some would pray a little later. Some only pray one prayer. Sometimes there's multiple prayers. But again, if there's an opening prayer, then it would probably be done before that statement of purpose. The statement of purpose is, it traditionally begins with that, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered together here today in the sight of God in the face of this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is commended of Paul to be honorable among all men, therefore not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but soberly and discreetly in the fear of God." The idea is you're telling people this is what we're doing here. And so during the rehearsal, I'll say that we're with the statement of purpose. We'll say to people, we've come together today to celebrate the wedding of John and Sarah or whatever, and that way, if somebody showed up at the wrong place, that they know they can quietly, I thought I was going to the bar mitzvah of little Thomas or whatever. But at any rate, everybody knows this is why we're here. Now, then you would typically have the declaration of consent. Now, let me say that again, in some states, this is a legal requirement. You've got to get permission from the bride and the groom to move forward. This generally consists of, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, etc., and so on, and that they would say, "I do." That they are just verbally consenting, recognizing, yes, I am entering into this contract. And the same thing, I would get a declaration of consent also from the bride. She would say, "I do." Now, in the traditional wedding liturgy, it is after the bride and the groom give their consent, it's at that point that you would ask, who gives this woman to be married to this man? And the father would give his consent. He would say, "I do," or "her mother and I," or what have you. And so I know that a lot of people have kind of mixed it up a little bit, and a lot of times that father, the giving away of the bride, a lot of times comes even before the statement of purpose. So that as soon as they come in, the very first thing that happens is, who gives this woman to be married to this man? And he says, "I do," or "her mother and I." And I always in the rehearsal, or even before the rehearsal, especially if it's a family dynamic that is, that requires an extra thought, I always ask, who's going to be giving away the bride, and what have you given thought to how, again, to the bride, how do you want that answered? And so, in some cases it's "her mother and I," and in other cases "I do," or some other answer. But the man giving, typically a man, but the person giving away the bride needs to know what they're going to say before they can say it. And then, of course, you'd ask the congregation to sit down and then move forward. Be sure, and even if you have to add that to your notes, be sure to say, "You may be seated," so that people are not standing. They may sit down eventually, but go ahead and give them permission to be seated as you move forward. And so after that declaration of consent, sometimes there is a brief exhortation to the bride and the groom, a statement about what marriage is and what the Bible teaches about marriage, and then you enter into the marriage vows. And again, after that exhortation, you'll ask the bride and groom, say, you talk about marriage is about two becoming one. And so because of that, I'm going to ask you now to join your hands. By that point, most brides and grooms weddings that I've done, they've already been holding hands anyway. As soon as they get up there, he's taking her by the hand once she's been given away, and they're already either she's got his arm or something, but they formally then would be asked to join hands to repeat their vows, and typically the bouquet would be handed off to the maid of honor, and so again with short, simple phrases, I would ask the beginning with the groom, and then to the bride, ask them to repeat the vows after me. Some couples choose to write their own vows, and that certainly is legitimate. That's all right. I always ask, if couples are writing their own vows, I always ask to read them ahead of time. I want to know before I endorse. I want to know what they're going to say. And so your couple shouldn't have an issue with that. Sometimes, and I encourage, they ought to write them down. I know some couples want to get brave and just say them off the cuff. Nobody should ever do that. You should write, even if you memorize them or whatever, then just say, and not read them. That's okay too, but you should. And I've had couples too that wrote their own vows, but gave them to me to read for them to read back. And so they wrote their vows, but then I'm reading short phrases for them to read back. And so that's appropriate also. That way they're not up there holding note cards or whatever. They can just concentrate on. They've already given thought to what they were going to say. The vows are theirs. They wrote them. But on the day of the wedding, when they're nervous, things can kind of get away from them. Generally, after the vows are exchanged, rings would be exchanged. Now, we usually work this out well before the rehearsal as well, but you ought to know by the rehearsal time where the rings are going to be. And so typically, that's a responsibility a lot of times of the best man or the maid of honor, one or both. Sometimes the ring bearer, most of the time the ring bearer, especially depending on their age, is not actually bearing the rings. Every now and then a couple will want the actual rings to be on the pillow or whatever, and so I always if that's the case, I always speak to the best man when the ring bearer gets up here while we're all looking at the bride and whatever. Get the rings off the pillow. You go ahead and get them then and have them handy. Hold them in your hand or put them in your pocket or whatever. And so I would typically then ask for the rings for whoever's got them. A lot of times, and I will typically just extend my Bible to the person that has the rings, ask them just set them on the Bible. And so they would set, if it's the best man's got one and the maid of honor's got the other, I'll just have them set. It just kind of, I don't know, just placing them on the Bible kind of adds a little extra, sacrament, I guess, to the sacredness to the occasion. But then I usually will talk about the significance of the rings, what they mean, their token of the covenants that they just made. Give the bride's ring to the groom and say, "Will you place this on the third finger of her left hand? Repeat after me this promise." Generally, it's a much shorter pledge. Usually, it consists of about 4 phrases that we'll repeat. And then the same thing with the bride and the groom. I always tell them when we're doing this during the rehearsal, when we're kind of walking through it, we come to that point, that the day of the wedding, we have a tendency to kind of be really nervous. And sometimes the rings that you bought, 2 months ago or whatever, you sized 2 months ago, they're not quite, when your hands are swollen or sweaty or clammy or whatever, sometimes they don't always fit the way that they did when you tried them on. And so I always tell them, listen, it is perfectly acceptable if he needs help getting it over that knuckle or whatever, groom, you can reach down there and help you slide it on. And the same thing for her. I always tell that groom, please don't force the ring on her finger. if you break her finger on the wedding day, your honeymoon's going to be a disaster. You're going to hear about that for the rest of the week. Well, she's got a split. No, don't do it. So again, walk them. Make sure they're comfortable well before you get to that moment, and be prepared. Now, listen. Anything can happen in a wedding. Anything can happen in a wedding. And I was doing a wedding one time, and the bride was coming down the aisle, and the groom said, I forgot the rings. To me. We're watching the bride come down the aisle. He said, I forgot the rings. And I said, where are they? He said, on the kitchen table. All right. We'll get through this. And so when she got up to the front, we got her engagement ring. She was wearing her engagement ring. We got her engagement ring from her, and he gave her the engagement ring, and she gave him my wedding band. It's like, we'll get through this. We'll straighten it out later. We'll put the real rings on later, but we'll get through. So sometimes you just got to improvise, right? I told you I usually use my Bible to hand. Do you have the rings? I did that one time. And as soon as I went to pull my Bible back, both of those rings fell off my Bible and rolled, 6 or 8 feet. They were family heirlooms. That was Mama's wedding band. But at any rate, needless to say, anything can happen. Just be prepared for it. But again, you got to be in control too. If don't you lose it. You got to be the one that keeps it together. And whether anybody else does or not. And so after those marriage vows and the exchange of the rings, a lot of times there's generally a symbol of unity. And again, this, whether it's the unity candle or the tying of the knot or the sand. Sometimes with the sand ceremony, there's a little script that you might get with sand that kind of tells you a little something to read. You can kind of read that as they're pouring. I like to read it ahead of time if they're going to have something like that read, and then let them do it while a song is being played. And I usually tell them, listen, take your time. When that's finished, whether it's the lighting of the unity candle, which takes no time at all. And again, anything can happen. I mean, I've had candles that got blown out or whatever accidentally, before they could light the unity candle. That's all right. Keep the lighter somewhere handy. You can make it work. The less you draw attention to, the less is noticeable, right? So nobody even pay attention if you don't make an issue about it. But I usually tell a couple, when you finish that, while the song is, just come back and stand here and look into each other's eyes, talk to each other. You'll never remember the things that you say to each other in that moment, but you'll never forget how you felt in that moment. And so, you'll go back and watch the video later. So what was you saying anyway? What are you smiling about? Who knows? Who remembers that stuff? But just come back, finish the song, and then as soon as the song is over, typically I would pray a prayer. I'd lay my hand on the couple's hand. They're still joining hands together. Pray a prayer for blessing upon their union, and then it's the pronouncement of marriage. And that typically includes a recap of all the things that we've done, for as much as the two of them have come together and consented in holy wedlock, witnessed the same before God and His company, pledged their faith to each other by giving rings and by exchanging vows and what have you. It's now by the power vested me as by the state of Kentucky and as a minister of the gospel, that I pronounce that they're husband and wife, and then I simply look at the groom at that point and say, you may kiss your bride. And I always tell couples during the rehearsal when I do that, I said, listen, the kiss should be passionate enough to demonstrate you're newlyweds, you love one another, and you're glad to spend the rest of your life. But it also should be appropriate for public, And so I generally will point that out, say make it appropriate for the rest of us. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable, especially the minister standing up there in the middle of all of that. And so after the pronunciation of marriage, then they kiss, and then they're introduced as Mr. and Mrs. and then the recessional would begin. And so they'd start on their way out, and of course they're going out in reverse order that they came in. And so they're starting, the bride and groom are the first ones out, and then typically the maid of honor and the best man and flower girl and ring bearer, and then, the party goes from the inside out, leaving. And of course they go out faster than what they came in. I typically tell folks when they're coming in that you should start when the person has reached the front of the building. Maybe even get in place depending on the song and the length of the song when they've arrived. You don't move until they've got to the front of the church. When you're going out, I usually tell folks when they get about halfway, go ahead and go. And so, and then at that point, you should know what's going to happen with the dismissal. Now, we talk about this prior to the rehearsal, and certainly get the details worked out at the rehearsal about how typically the wedding party would leave, and then the bride and groom's parents, family members would also follow them out. And then either ushers would come back and dismiss them one row at a time. Some couples choose, just let them all go together or whatever. I've seen and I've always told the couple, I'll make an announcement. We'll get the music to come down for a moment, turn it down a little bit. I'll step forward. On behalf of, Josh and Haley, thank you all for coming today. We're so glad that you were here to be a part of this. Everyone is welcome to go to the reception. It'll follow, such and such or what have you. And you can be dismissed at this time, or the ushers are coming back to dismiss you row by row. Sometimes as the officiant, I have dismissed the rows. I've just stepped down and dismissed each row, to walk out the back to the receiving line. I've even seen wedding couples come and dismiss the rows themselves. That way they greet each person that was at the wedding and dismiss them. And so whatever works, but just have a plan in place so that you're not either, and certainly make sure the plan is worked out to where the parents, the bride and groom's family, they're out before, nothing's worse than, grandma and grandpa being the last ones to get to the receiving line. And so, make sure that they've at least been dismissed before anybody else goes. And then, let's talk about the final details just a moment. And of course, this includes, the completion of the certificate of marriage, and making sure that it gets filed, make sure the paperwork gets done. The state of Kentucky doesn't require that anybody signs anything except the officiant at this point. The bride and groom have already signed everything, and so the officiant would fill out the rest of the details about the ceremony, would list the witnesses, they print their names, that so and so. I always ask the bride and groom, who do you want to be witnesses? Who do you want? Now sometimes they defer. It's the bride, it's the maid of honor and the best man. Sometimes they, let's have our mothers do it, or what have you. And so always defer to them. Who would you like to, to be the witnesses? I typically, because Kentucky includes a certificate of marriage at the bottom of the license for the bride and groom to keep, I usually have the witnesses sign that part. Again, their names are going to be printed in the other part, but I have them just sign that other part. That's the keepsake for the bride and groom. I give that to them. I usually will tell them I will take care of the original to make sure your license gets back to the state, especially if they're going on a honeymoon or something. And I give them that certificate. I say, if you guys are going on a honeymoon, take this with you. And I always tell them, take it, let it everywhere you go. Tell everybody you see you're on your honeymoon. Because restaurants sometimes will give you free desserts or what have you. Hey, it's your honeymoon. Take advantage of it. Whatever you can get free, get it free. And so if you need some kind of proof of that, sometimes motels will upgrade you to a better room. You get the honeymoon suite or whatever. And so by all means, take and go with you on a cruise ship or whatever. I mean, have at it. I tell everybody you see, we are here celebrating our honeymoon. And if you need proof of it, then that'll be the proof for you. And then the other thing that I wanted to include in this also is just a question about the rehearsal. Some of the ministers' manuals that you'll run across talk about the reception should the minister attend the reception? And that's a question that that especially if this reception is away from the church, and you think there's a potential that people could be drinking and even, I mean, some people have, they just, that to them, that's what the wedding is about. The open bar is about what the wedding's about. If you think there's going to be dancing and drinking and things could get out of hand or whatever at some point in time, you may have to make a decision about, I don't know whether or not I really want to attend this wedding or not. My general rule of thumb is, if I had been invited to this wedding and I wasn't the officiant, if I had been invited to this wedding and would have went to the reception, I'm probably going to go to the reception as the officiant as well. I also kind of defer to the idea of, if you're the officiant, if at all possible, even if you only go by the reception for the start of it, they may ask you, the caterer may ask the minister, hey, will you bless the food? Give you an opportunity to pray one more prayer or whatever. And so, if nothing else, do that. Maybe eat dinner or whatever. And then the other thing is to value your time. If it's a Saturday evening, you got church tomorrow and you got things you got to get ready for. How much you've already been at the church half the day anyway. How much more time have you got allotted to this? And so, part of it's about using wisdom and what's the best use of my time. But again, I never want to put myself in a position to where I don't want to be witness to people being getting drunk till they pass out. And so if you think that may be an issue, then it's certainly okay to excuse yourself before it gets to that point. At some point, I probably should have mentioned this. If you don't have a minister's manual, then by all means you should pick one up. Most ministers' manuals have information about funerals and also weddings. There's usually more than one script for a wedding that's in there. And you can, when you're doing weddings, you can have a ministry that lasts a lifetime, and you can just kind of have a go-to. This is my wedding. I'm going to do the traditional liturgy, and that's all I'm going to do. I always like to customize, especially if it's a couple that I know personally that's dear to me. I like the marriage to be customized some. I want to customize the vows a little bit, or the exhortation to the bride and groom. And so you can use the liturgy that's printed in a minister's manual to kind of, the basic idea is keep the order of the ceremony the same. Keep those orders in place. Again, some of those components of the wedding are required to make the marriage legal, so you want to include some of them. But how you do that and how you say it, that's up to you. What scriptures that you use, and what you say about the rings, or what you say about marriage. All these things can be customized by you. The thing that separates funerals, the thing that separates a good funeral from a great funeral, or a good funeral from a bad funeral, really has to do with how personal the funeral is. And the same thing is true about a wedding. Make the wedding personal. I had a man one time ask me about doing a wedding for him. He had coached our daughter in basketball for a long time. He was marrying another basketball coach, and near the area, they kind of coached against each other, and they were going to get married. And he'd asked me about doing their wedding, and of course I was honored to do it. So where do you want to do it? He said, I'm working on it. I said, I'll get back to you. Then he called me back. And he said, can you meet us at West End Gym, where the middle school played basketball for all those years? We're going to get married at the gym. And they got married at half court. And so I came with a referee shirt and a whistle, and met them at half court and officiated their wedding. And one of the things that I talked about in the exhortation of the bride and groom was that a marriage is a team. There's no I in team, and just kind of talked about how we need to do this. So again, feel free to, and of course it was all spiritual. We presented the gospel in this marriage as well, but we customized it to where it meant something, meant something to them. Nobody's ever asked me to dress up like Emperor Palpatine for a Star Wars wedding or something like that. I'm not sure I would do anything quite like that. But feel free to make a wedding personal and memorable for the wedding for the couple itself.